Welcome to Sharp End. Tonight, there's disagreement within parties. In the Assembly, Labour ministers and backbenchers have been trying to resolve their differences on whether or not the time is right to ban parents from smacking their children. And at Westminster, MPs were given two very different versions of Conservative Party policy on devolving income tax.
Who speaks for the Conservative Party in Wales? Is it yourself or himself?
It's not him, it's me. They're both very clear about that. And jam tomorrow, why there's still a bottleneck on the border. Much to discuss then with my guests, who are the Labour AM Julie Morgan, Plaid Cymru's Lindsay Whittle, and a new face for us, property developer and social entrepreneur Kevin Green. You're all very welcome. Plenty of us to get our teeth into. Let's start with the vote tomorrow. We hope it'll be tomorrow, Lindsay Whittle, on the whether or not to ban smacking. It's your amendment to a previously existing bill that will lead to this vote. Why have you done that? Why have you introduced it?
Well, it's an historic opportunity for the Assembly tomorrow. 32 sitting AMs are already signed up to the Children Are Unbeatable campaign. We have been speaking about this in the Assembly now for well over 10 years. In fact, I think it was the year 2000 when it first started. There's been two votes, one in 2004 and another in 2011, both successful. Well, it's now time for action.
Do you think the Assembly actually has the power? That's one big question, isn't it? Whether or not this is actually a criminal justice question.
I think the Assembly does have the power, and the First Minister is on record as saying we have the power.
And do you think that the Assembly parties have the mandate? That's the other objection that the Welsh Government raises against it, saying it should be a manifesto issue.
We've had the power because of the previous vote to give the Assembly more powers. So you're quite right in saying that this wouldn't have been in any party's manifesto because we didn't have the powers pre-2011.
So that's changed everything, you're saying?
It's changed. It's really changed it.
Julie Morgan, are you disappointed that the Welsh Government doesn't want to support this particular move?
Well, what I hope is that I'm waiting to see what the Minister says when she replies to the debate on Lindsay's motion. And what I hope is that whatever happens, we do have the opportunity to bring this into effect during this Assembly term. There has been a long-standing commitment to it. The government is certainly, I think that there is general support within the Labour Party for this. But in terms of actually bringing it in, we need to convince the government when the time is right.
Do you think you might rebel? Because that's what it would involve if you supported...
Well, I want to hear what the Minister says. I know that the government is reluctant to consider this amendment in the context of this bill because it's a very wide bill. They would be worried about it going to the Supreme Court and there'd be a lot of delay. So if we accept that, I'd want some assurance that there would be the opportunity to debate it again.
Kevin Green, you'll be pleased I'm not going to ask you about the ins and outs of voting for amendments or motions, but as a non-politician and as a father, do you think a ban would be a good idea?
Yes, I'd fully support it. My children are 20, 18 and 16, and I think that children become their environment, and if you're going to smack a child's going to want to smack somebody else, basically. So I've brought my children up to be of good manners, and you don't need to smack children to do that.
So being opposed to smacking is a different thing to wanting to see the law changed to introduce a ban. You think a ban would be desirable and enforceable? Absolutely,
I think it should be, because there's too much abuse of children, and I would support the ban fully of smacking.
You must be very pleased to hear that, Lindsay Whittle.
Absolutely,
yes. Very good news indeed. Thank you, Kevin.
And we didn't plan that.
It's a reasoned argument. It's a reasoned argument.
It's great to have the word of a father, and it makes sense. And children, if you are hit, you're more likely to hit yourself.
But we haven't got much time. In fact, we've nearly run out of time. But the point that I made to Kevin, which is that thinking that is one thing, but a ban is a very big different step, isn't it?
Well, I think 34, 35 countries throughout the world have done it. There have been no criminalisation of parents. There'll be no adverse reactions. Surely in Wales we can do this.
And it's about preventing people smacking. We have to educate people that it is wrong to hit your child.
OK, right, thank you all very much. So agreement on that, which was, as I say, wasn't planned. We now move on to another topic of disagreement. Calls for more joined-up government, nothing new. The old Welsh office promised a bypass for Llanymynech, where the main road between Wrexham and Mid-Wales crosses the Powys-Shropshire border. It was an easy promise, as the bypass would be in England. leaving the Department of Transport to pick up the bill. But ministers there spotted an easy economy measure and cancelled a project that would mostly benefit Wales. That was nearly 20 years ago. So Owain Phillips went to see why nothing's happened since.
A typical day in the village of Llanymynech in Powys, and the traffic trundling through the main route from south to north-east Wales. Residents here say they need a bypass before lives are lost.
I mean, looking at 40, 50, 60 mile an hour quite often. So it's very, very dangerous, and I want something done before children are killed.
Plans for a bypass were drawn up in the 80s, but were dropped by the Department for Transport in 1995.
Because it's back in Wales, the bottom end of the village.
It's just crazy.
It's a complete nonsense.
But by early 2000, local MPs Lembit Opic and Owen Paterson said it was the Welsh Government's responsibility to get the bypass built. Talks between the governments continued, but by 2006, the Department for Transport again decided the scheme was no longer a priority. The local MP in the Commons last month was also keen to place the blame for the delays on devolution.
One damaging consequence of devolution has been the abandonment of investment in cross-border road improvements in mid-Wales.
And Welsh Secretary David Jones agrees, arguing changes to the devolution settlement are needed.
The issue of cross-border road routes is one unfortunate consequence of devolution in that there is no overarching arrangement in place. This is something that I've specifically asked the Silk Commission to consider, and I hope it will address it in its report.
So who is responsible? Llanymynech sits right on the border, on the A483. A bypass for the village and nearby Pant would benefit Welsh motorists, but the proposed bypass would be built in England. That's why the Welsh Government says it's a matter for the English Highways Agency, while they say it's not a priority for them.
I think it's recognised that both governments would have to contribute. I think the issue is that large parts of the project would be in England, but of course the benefit would be to Wales. So it's getting that cooperation between the Welsh and the UK government. I think the only way that can be done is to set up a working group where all parties are involved.
Campaigners estimate over 14,000 vehicles use this road daily. Other areas along the route have seen improvements in recent years, but residents here say they shouldn't be forgotten because of their location on the border.
We keep campaigning, we keep raising it, we have meetings. We had a meeting when Owen Paterson came and Glyn Davis came. I mean, we get their support, we get their help, but it's just pushing it through that just seems to... It's the money that's not there, and residents are really, really worried.
I want the funding. There's ways round any problem. We just wanted to move forward. We wanted to go back into the planning stage and to have a date to start.
Campaigners say they'll keep up the fight for a bypass, but with both governments not giving any firm financial commitment, it seems the issue, just like the traffic, will keep trundling on.
Julie Morgan, this is a problem that started before devolution, but is David Jones right to say that devolution hasn't helped the situation since then?
No, I don't think so. I think it's quite wrong for David Jones and others to put the blame on the Welsh Government. This is obviously something people who live and straddle the border shouldn't suffer because of devolution and a dual responsibility. And I think you basically feel, looking at that clip, that there are means of getting people together. You can knock heads together, you can get a working party going, you can make proposals. And I understand that Edwina Hart, the business minister, has said that she is going to look at all options. So it's ridiculous to say that devolution has caused this.
Lindsay Whittle, is it one of those anomalies, or is it, how did Glyn Davis call it, a dangerous consequence of devolution?
If devolution is the cause, then it's devolution in England that is the cause. I've done some research on this. It was in 2001 that the West Midlands Regional Transport Board pulled the rug on this scheme because it involved the village of Pant as well as Llanymynech, and it was the English side who actually pulled the rug, not the Welsh side. To be fair to the Welsh Assembly government in 2001, they were committed. The rug was pulled from the English side. So I think people in England need to learn a lesson about devolution here in Wales, and we've got a lot of teachers here. We can teach them.
Kevin Green, looking in from the outside of the politics, what does it seem to you? Does it look like a consequence of devolution? Does it look like politicians squabbling over something, or is it something else?
Excuse me, if I was an English person listening to Lindsay, I'd be quite annoyed at that comment, because we do need to work together, and blaming the other side for something that hasn't happened is not a way to cause the outcome that we need. You know, we should, as Julie said, work together on this. Everybody wants it, so why not just sort it out?
Well, Lindsay Whittle, you had Kevin's support in the last discussion. You haven't got it this time. We are where we are.
Yeah, we are
Forget
where we
about
are,
arguing about how we got here. How do we sort it out?
I do agree that people need to get together. From the clips we've just seen, it seems a very busy and a very dangerous road. And if I lived in that village, I'd want something done as well. And I genuinely believe that the Welsh Government, again, can talk to the English Government. I don't know if the West Midlands Regional Transport Board is one of those still around, but clearly people need to get around a table. It happens all the time.
OK. And Kevin Green, how important are cross-border roads, but big infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, it's vital for business growth. Infrastructure is one of the most important things. And I travel a lot to North Wales, and we've got the worst links from south to north. We can go east-west easily, but as soon as I want to get to Anglesey, I've got to map the whole day out to get there, you know?
So perhaps it's almost something that's beyond politics, really, needs to be taken.
Well, yes.
OK, that's another matter. Thank you very much for the time being. Less agreement with that one between you two. Thank you so far. It seems that paying Welsh income tax is becoming a less likely prospect these days. The Welsh Government is distinctly unenthusiastic, and even Plaid Cymru says it's not a priority. That's because of lockstep, a dreadful piece of jargon, which means the 40p rate of income tax can't be altered without a similar change to the standard rate. But the Conservatives leader in the Assembly has been telling MPs that his party's priority is to cut the tax of those who pay more than most.
I haven't heard an argument other than Scotland have the lockstep, so Wales should have it, that would convince me that the lockstep is a sensible course of action to restrain, or restrict, should I say, any future Welsh Government from being able to use these powers imaginatively. But I remain to be convinced.
Mr Davies left the Welsh Affairs Committee with the clear impression that his party wanted to attract high earners to Wales with an income tax cut, and that the Welsh Conservatives rejected the view of the Treasury and the Secretary of State for Wales that there would have to be a similar cut for standard rate payers.
Who speaks for the Conservative Party in Wales? Is it yourself or himself?
I think that the view that Mr Davies is enunciating is very much a personal view of his own. It certainly doesn't represent the policy of the Welsh Assembly Group, nor does it certainly represent the policy of HM Government.
So, Kevin Green, do you think the Welsh Government should have some control, at least, over income?
Yes, I do. We're quite different in our control to central government, and dynamics and demographics here are totally different. And I'm fully supportive of what Welsh Government does. I've worked with the ministers to a certain extent, and I find them to be very sensible.
What benefit would it be to have that, say, over income tax?
I think it will match more what goes on in Wales. As I say, there's different activity here, so they should have the flexibility, if they want to actually change the tax brackets.
When you say change, you mean cut, I take it?
I'm obviously all for a cut, because I'm a big taxpayer on the higher bracket, but at the end of the day, if they were to increase and have a need for that, well, they should have the control over that.
As a big taxpayer, do you think that the higher rate is one that should be cut, or if the Welsh Government had the ability to alter each particular band, should they focus on the higher earners?
Yeah, I mean, the higher earners, they've generally worked hard. I was homeless in 1984, and I built my businesses from nothing. And it's discouraging for me to get taxed through the eyeballs, when I've made a lot of money. So I'm sometimes thinking to myself, well, why bother, So tax needs to be controlled on the high end, otherwise people are just going to go abroad and not bother with the UK.
Julie Morgan, what do you make of that? Do you think that that's an argument that Kevin has just said, that he's very supportive of the Welsh Government? I'm not sure that all your colleagues would quite agree with him on that.
No, I mean, myself, I don't think income tax is a priority. I think there are much more important things in this whole debate.
Getting the power over income tax.
Yeah, getting the power over income tax. I don't see it as a priority, really.
If the Welsh Government had power over income tax.
If it did get power, obviously this lock stop would cause a lot of problems, really, because it takes away the flexibility. And so I don't see it would be any advantage. And I believe Scotland have had it all the time since devolution started. And it's never been used.
It's generally considered, yes, to be...
It's not flexible enough.
What about the principle? This is something Kirsty Williams was arguing, that once you have this devolved, then you've got the principle of the Welsh Government's responsibility.
Well, I'm certainly not against the principle of the Welsh Government having responsibility. Obviously, my party did say if we did have income tax powers that there would have to be a referendum. Sure. But I'm certainly not against the principle, but it's not a priority.
And it's not a priority for Plaid Cymru either, Lindsay Whittle. And yet, surely you should welcome that principle that the Welsh Government has control and responsibility over at least some of the money.
Yes, of course. And Leanne Wood, our leader, gave evidence last week as well to the committee in the House of Commons. And Plaid Cymru will actually be tabling an amendment to the Wales bill to end this lock stop. It's not acceptable, and you know, that's absolutely vital that we can control income tax here in Wales. But we're a long way off that yet. You know, we've got another, I don't know how many budgets to go. We don't know where we'll be as a country in the future, what the financial situation is going to be like.
Can I just get a quick word from you two as politicians? Do you think that however and wherever Wales gets to this situation of having some say over income tax, is what it needs to do cut taxes? Julie Morgan, is it actually about reducing taxes?
Well, obviously, you'd like to reduce the taxes for everybody, and that would be ideal. But would we ever be in a situation in Wales where we'd have to do that, be able to do that?
And Lindsay Whittle?
Well, we all signed up to the Silk Commission, and you can't cherry-pick as I don't want to interfere in the row with the Conservative Party. That's their business, not mine. Otherwise, I may rub my hands a little bit in delight, but that's their business, that's their row. But you know, we all agreed to participate with the Silk Commission, and it's wrong for David Jones to just cherry-pick.
OK, and a very quick word from the non-politician. Do you think the politicians here in Wales will be cutting taxes if they can?
I would hope so on the normal person on the street like me. But on the big PLCs, don't let them get away with not paying tax.
On that note, let's move on and we turn our attention further afield, actually, because we've all seen the TV pictures of Syrian refugees fleeing the war that's devastated their country. But one Welsh MP has seen for himself the terrible conditions that some of them are enduring even after they've escaped the fighting. The Shadow Middle East Minister, Ian Lucas, has just returned from visiting refugee camps in Lebanon. And the Wrexham MP told me earlier how he'd seen and heard what people have been through and what they're still experiencing.
They had fled heavy fighting, very recent fighting in Syria itself. And having been through almost 3 years of civil war, they very recently made the decision that they'd had enough, that they were fleeing their homes, and they went across the border into Lebanon. And I saw the type of conditions that they're now living there.
So these must have been quite desperate people.
They were. I mean, the first thing that struck me was that the hills that led to the camps that they were in were covered in snow. And the situation within the camps is very, very difficult indeed. These aren't official camps. They are set up on private land. The refugees are actually paying rent to be there. And these are hastily constructed sites. There is some help available from the United Nations, but it is a desperate situation on the ground with elderly people, widows, very young children, all in makeshift camps with very little education, very little health care, and it's a very, very tough situation.
And Lebanon itself is not particularly safe place for them to be.
Absolutely. This is one of the most difficult countries in the Middle East. Over very many years, it's been hugely sectarian with different racial and religious groups, and at the moment, it does not actually have a government. We hope that that might change shortly because they have huge burdens to face. There are approaching 1 million refugees in a country that has a population of 4 million. So it's the equivalent of Wales dealing with around 750,000 refugees. If you can imagine that, it shows the scale of the problems that they are facing there.
You paint a very bleak picture. Were there any signs of optimism, of a chance that some of these people might be able to go home?
Well, the thing that will enable them to go home is if the fighting stops. And last week we did have talks at the Geneva II talks, which over the weekend did allow some access for individuals within Syria who are in very difficult situations on the ground there. So there is some optimism while the talks continue. However, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that because the talks have ended last Friday, there is still a very urgent situation on the ground, and it's really important that all sides in this conflict come together and agree a ceasefire for humanitarian access for these people. All of them want to go home. They want to return to the places that they've lived for many, many years. They've lived for almost 3 years through a war already, but they fled because the war was intensifying. So we've got to stop the fighting to enable the people to go home.
And what about what we can do, or what the UK can do? Last week the government announced there'd be £600 million worth of aid and a welcome for the most needy, the most vulnerable refugees. Is that good enough?
Well, I'm very pleased that I met with the United Kingdom Embassy in Beirut, who are working very hard in supporting refugees within Lebanon coming from Syria. And I was very pleased also that the government last week, under pressure from the opposition, did accept that some of the most vulnerable people, and we are talking about hundreds of vulnerable people, children, disabled people, people who have contacts with the UK, will be coming to the UK. So I think we are doing a great deal, and the government here deserves credit for that. But we need to intensify the work that we're doing to stop the fighting, because ultimately we want people to stop leaving Syria, and the only thing that's going to achieve that is peace.
Ian Lucas, thank you very much. Julie Morgan, that aid and that welcome that the Prime Minister was talking about, is that enough? Is that enough? Is Britain doing enough to help the refugees of Syria?
Well, it was certainly done in a very begrudging way because it took a long time for the government here and for the Prime Minister to agree that we should receive some of the Syrians as refugees from the camps. And
they've done that now.
They've done it now, and that's good that they've done it. But I don't think we know yet whether this is going to be part of the United Nations scheme. We don't know how many people are involved. I think we should be doing more. The situation is horrific there.
Lindsay Whittle, there's always called for people to do more to help refugees. There's also, similarly on the other side, people concerned about large-scale immigration to the UK. It's a difficult balancing act, isn't it?
Yes, I don't think these people are a threat to the people of Wales. I'm rather surprised that the Migration Advisory Committee talks to the Scottish Parliament, to the Northern Ireland Parliament, but not to the Welsh Senedd. I don't understand why.
Well,
and these people need help.
Well,
I mean, Lebanon taking 1 million people, fair play.
A quick word from you then, Kevin Green?
Yeah, I think emergency help is vital on the humanistic side, but at the end of the day, they said on the film they wanted a return. And there should be some policy where they go back afterwards, not be supported by us as taxpayers, you know, for the evermore.
OK, it's a big issue. Thank you very much. We've just touched the surface of it, but I'm sure the debate will carry on. Thank you all very much for joining me. And that's it for tonight. The debate continues on Twitter, where I'm at AdrianMasters84. Sharp End will be back next Monday night. For now, thanks to my guests. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.